Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Today, I have a very special guest. Her name is Nicole Willits, and she is the Strategic Initiatives and Sustainability Manager of the Pella Corporation. Nicole has been with Pella for over 5 years. She has been on the product side of Pella and now has a new role within the company focused on product and sustainability. She comes from a commercial interiors background where she has won awards for the products she's worked on. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we get into Pella, I kind of want to give everybody a little bit more of an overview about who you are. So I see you're a uni grad. I'm a North Dakota State grad, so we're technically rivals, and have worked. And that you've worked for other building product corporations. And Alicia says you've won some awards, like the intro said. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so let's see. I'm a Midwesterner, born and raised in Iowa. I ran away to Texas for a while, for Washington State for a while, but landed back in Southeast Iowa where my family was, and ended up at the H&I Corporation, which is where I started my product development journey. Before that, I was a wedding coordinator, so it is a really translatable project to product kind of experience, but I spent 8 years doing different variety work in our surface materials, some of the sustainability work there. I worked in our opening price point market, so I spent quite a bit of time in China doing that side of the business. And then jokingly, under the umbrella of H&I, there's quite a few different opportunities within that particular arena of commercial interiors, and I chose to move to all steel. All steel, I joked that it was working in color again. I got to play with a little bit more of the A&D focus. I went into the tertiary markets for soft seating and helped launch some of the first commercial sofas and soft lounge chairs in that particular market. Was really excited to work with American designers and all of the American manufacturing out of the different locations we had throughout the US. And so that was where I was at until Pella came knocking. And so when I joined Pella, as you mentioned, I was in product development, worked with that particular side of the business as well as our trends team. So not sure if you mentioned it, but I co-lead our Pella Trends team, which is a dynamic cross-functional group that helps kind of give line of sight to consumer insights and really how do we talk about what's happening in consumers' hearts and minds today. How does that translate into the mainstream views? And then how do we talk about that as ways for predictive paths for innovation and all of the areas of the business that we could kind of dabble into. So that kind of lands me where I'm at today, which is with the new role, which focuses a lot more on how do we translate, again, what's happening in the marketplace into products and being able to communicate that, as well as how do we take the innovation portage that we do with the business, how do we better sell our claims and the concise nature to our marketing sides of the business? How do we then approach sustainability in ways that make sense to our consumer base? So the kind of a broad range and definitely a new area to lean into, but super exciting stuff happening.
Two questions. First one is, so I'm glad you touched on the trends because that was one of my questions that I sort of had pre-written down here was, what you've described what it is, I think. You're trying to forecast and look at like where the market is moving and stuff. Where do you guys get the data though? I mean, how does that all, without giving any proprietary stuff away, I'm just kind of generally wondering, we do have consumers listening to this podcast, obviously, but we have business owners. And I think people would just be curious, about generally how that, where you get the stuff you need to be able to plug it into whatever you're working with to understand maybe where things are going in forecasting.
This is, you're tapped the right vein here because I really love this topic. And our team, I mentioned, we're cross-functional. So it is a dynamic group that goes across our marketing teams, our sales channels, our product groups, and it's really the innovation team and insights. So we really get kind of a good view and input to just the daily happenings of the business. It's our job and product to know our competitors. And so we kind of bring that to the table. And then within each one of the people that come to that, we also look at relevant markets and then associated tertiary markets and fun stuff like fashion. So what's happening there, and really what can we see that kind of starts to string together into more mainstream topics? Where will we start to see colorway shift, maybe specific highlights in houses that let those little puts and takes come together? And that all comes from going to trade shows and really diving into, one of my markets is commercial interior. So I have a background in it, but I can also, look at it and understand what was happening and changing and real pivots that's happening there. And we talk about what it means to, maybe highlight service, or maybe we're talking about a specific color. I mentioned curves and arches. That's scallops are everywhere. What's that mean for windows? How do we kind of make sure that we're highlighting the right things on .com? How do we translate all of that information? But backing even further into it is we use steep level analysis. And so that's looking at the very, very high level macro views, and it's from social, technological, economic, environmental, and political different impacts, which again trigger that consumer mindset. So like, what are people freaking out inside? What are they freaking out about? Where are their dollars going to potentially shift to? What makes them feel good when they're inside of the home, or what are they trying to change about that? And so we really take this big lens to it, apply all of those different market kind of broad mainstream views into it. And then of course, we then filter that into ways we can talk to our business. So whether it be in how we speak to the consumer, maybe it's a different shift in focus to security from safety, or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe it's a conversation on satin brass. You see black, you see white, you see satin brass. We're coming out with a new satin brass at the early next year for our hardware. It's something that we've seen in the marketplace. Obviously, things take time in product development, so we try not to get too ahead of ourselves, but at the same time, make sure that we bring the right timeless things to the marketplace of what's going to be the right time, what's going to have the right level of longevity. So there's a lot of different puts and takes to it. It's a really exciting group to be a part of because you get to have all of those different inputs, and the cross function to it is really dynamic. But it's also, sometimes we do just devolve and talk about pretty colors and pretty finishes, and is iridescent really ever going to translate into something meaningful in commercial markets? And sometimes the answer is yes. And sometimes the answer is we're definitely not recommending iridescent windows to the Pella team, but
yeah. Is some of the data derived from like surveys from designers or consumers? Is that where it directly comes from? Or is it sort of this? One other I thought I had, and I just wanted to ping you on it, was, so there's those surveys over here or whatever. Like, is it also, you talked about colors and styles, is it also sort of, for lack of better comparison, like a Vera Wang comes out and she says, this is the trend for dresses this year for weddings. Is there one for windows, or where exactly is it coming from?
Well, you're right. It's a lot of insights. So, we have a dedicated community and research team that goes out. And so we've got a viewpoint to consumers, and we get to have an unbiased opinion. We go out and we talk to them about things that aren't even necessarily windows and doors, so that we get kind of a cadence with that audience, and they get to know and relate to who's working our market research side. I think you have then another view that comes from the audiences we're directly involved with. So whether it be our architectural groups, we have pro builder groups, we have dynamic relationships with our distributors. And so we spend a lot of time surveying our OSRs and really trying to understand those consumer journeys. That's a big part of trying to see, like, where are they even engaging with you at? Once they engage with you, what are they hoping to get from you? Do they come to Pella to think that we are shining a light on window trends, or maybe they want to talk about their window within the space they're in? So they're looking for more aspiration, and they do want to see color. But to get to your question about specifically about windows, I think it's really, an amalgamation of all those inputs. And so you start to see the arches and trends come back by way of focusing on the 70s and what happened then you see people translating that to today, and then you start to see an increase. Well, we make content that's going to drive the right aspiration and inspiration pieces to it, and then we have a lot more engagement that starts happening, and questions that start popping up with our field reps that say, hey, I'm interested in this, can you fit my specs now? And then you engage with a very different audience and a different group of Pella who then starts to actualize and activate, we have an architectural group that will actually take plans and work to spec and make sure everything's right for the specific build that they're doing. So there's all kinds of these different macro and micro level points that we can get, whether it be in Pella data or through our Pella networks or through actual engagement with the consumers.
How long has Trends been around then at Pella?
Well, we've had a formal group now for the 5 years that I've been involved, and then informally, probably another 6-7 years.
Okay, so recent.
Yeah, I would say though, one of the key things there is we've kind of changed the focus. I'd say our innovation teams and product teams are always steeped in what was happening, but the focus on mainstream and how we communicate that better was definitely pivoted a few years ago.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I really feel like you guys are. I don't know if any other manufacturers are doing that. I hope they aren't, and you guys are, and therefore you're really tackling this idea of having a feedback loop, and really seeing that you guys are on the right track here. Let's talk a little bit about. So you first started with Pella, and you were doing just product side, but now it's morphed into this product to sustainability, or plus sustainability. Was that about the same time frame, 5 to 7 years? I know you've only been there for 5 years, but I'm just wondering before you were there, because sustainability is a very large buzzword right now. It's been that way for about a decade, but I think it's really obviously at the forefront as we speak.
Yeah, so Pella has had an environmental and sustainability based team that's heavily engaged in manufacturing compliance. And so anything that would have been based on tracking and making sure that we have a line of sight to what's happening in our plants has been part of a compliance level team for a long time. I mean, and Pella's rooted in fundamentals of being a steward and things of that nature. I think what this real movement in sustainability and this trigger point for the consumer side has given a lot of businesses a new reason to focus on that kind of topic and really focus on what it means to be dynamic about committing themselves to tracking and understanding what's happening. I think that's a huge portion, is just getting your baselines and getting your understanding of where you're at. And then this longer term view of whether it's a commitment in the community side, it's a commitment to designing the product for a more engaged environmental view, or a more cradle to grave kind of view, versus if we're going back further into supply chain. So I think there's a new focus to it that we've provided in allowing us to say, hey, this needs to be collaborative. Another area where this is meant to link, so it's strategic initiatives and sustainability, and part of that comes down to how do we better import our innovation as well. So these two main topics that feel really important for us to be able to communicate about, but also making sure that we have a roadmap, and how are we being proactive versus reactive? How are we making sure that we have a really credible conversation with our consumer about who we are and what we bring to the table? And that's really been what the focus of this new role has come up about, being frankly invested in the last few years of bringing up these different consumer insights, bringing up these different notions that people are interested in or wanting more information about, or frankly, they're just vectors of focus for us that become a new prioritization for the company.
Yeah. Where do you see windows and the sustainability associated with them? Because obviously they're a big portion of what we do, especially if we're doing a passive house, or we're trying to make sure it's a well-insulated house, that sort of thing. Where do you see things going from a decade from now, if you had to forecast a trend?
Well, you're absolutely right. So windows and doors are a huge part of what you're talking about on facade. I think the rough numbers are like 8% of the exterior, but 40% of your energy leak or your energy exposure comes from those areas. And so, there's the pressures of legislation that are absolutely kind of pushing the gamuts of what does an actual R value need to be for us to be, moving towards a better climate focus. I'd say, the preeminence of new technology. So whether it be in films, whether it be, the thin triple glazing that people are talking about, I think the iterations for that are only going to continue to grow, and being able to help showcase that. I'd say another area is, one of Pella's real focuses has been how do we get people to install better? Because that's a big portion of what goes into your window. We can make an excellent window, and if it's installed poorly, it's still not going to be a good experience.
Yeah, I mean, they could almost negate the whole idea of the product.
Exactly.
Very good point.
Yeah. So, I mean, you'll see we've made stutter steps in really even just creating. So for Lowe's, for example, we do new installation bays. So if you're in aisle in Lowe's, all of the things to install a window, your tapes and your fillers and all of the stuff for your nail fitting is going to be in this one installation bay. We may not get your window. We hope you do. We hope you pick up a Pella window in aisle. But even if we're not, we're still getting engaged with the product and having the ability to showcase what top tier associated installation product is with that. And so really trying to engage in educating and making sure that customers know that there is this kind of ancillary, it seems like an ancillary step, but it's a really important part of the overarching process. And then our innovation will start to dig into that deeper, because we know that that's such an integral part of the overall purchase journey for everybody.
Yeah, you're hitting on a perfect word right there, innovation. So what edge do you think Pella has on its competitors when it comes to sustainability in terms of innovation?
Our team for the innovation side of the company is just really dynamic. They are just full of constant ideation and iteration, and then taking it out to market. So that's probably the one thing that I am most proud to be a part of, getting the whole coffer of the view to what happens from, the guys with Legos on the table and they're like iterating mech movement and motion, to when we actually get to take something in front of a consumer and it's at a point where maybe we're with 3D printed parts, or maybe we're fully engaged with a prototype, and getting to take that iteratively through. And I think, hinging a little bit more to bring in where that trends capacity goes, getting to talk to them early on about, we might see something that's interesting or cool, or like, that ESO that we just launched, our Easy Slide Operator for Impervia, we came up with that in the sense of just, it hadn't been touched for so long. But then when you started to come to the table with what we were talking about trends wise, of people staying in their homes longer and wanting to make sure that they're planning proactively and not reactively within their space for what is, let's be fair, sometimes a once in a lifetime event when you change out windows in a home. So how can we take what is frankly still just candor and conversation, and it would be nice too, in order to then turn around and have a product that is not only sellable, it's actually solving a problem. Less than 5 pounds of force becomes a really dynamic conversation that is super cool if you're just talking about the function of the window or the look of it, but then it's also backed with all this different information and insight to help what we're also talking about in different sales forms. So I think that we have just an immense leg up because of not only the great minds that we have working there, but then we have, again, this research and insight side of the team. And then we have our network. So, I mean, the Pella side is really enabled with our distribution network that has an immense amount of input and rapid feedback. So we can iterate, we can go into a market and do, just trial runs. We'll run up to Omaha. They're a great market for us. They will get first dibs on certain things because we want to try out whether or not people are responding to it. Are we able to get our sales pitch in? Do they find the value that we believe it's being marketed? So we get to have these really interesting, very design driven conversations and iterations, and then it's translated well into being able to have award-winning products that come out of it as well.
Yeah. If someone is considering remodeling or building a new building, or a new house or new building, why do you think they should consider Pella? And I'll give you my reason first. And that is, I have Pella in my house, and the warranty and the customer attention is top notch. And as a builder and an architect who worked with various other manufacturers, if the client picks some other manufacturer, I don't really have a choice over that. But is that those other folks are just, I can't believe how atrocious the customer service is. And Pella is just phenomenal in this day and age. So that'd be my reason why they should consider Pella. What's yours?
shout out to our customer service, because they are the real troopers in many of the situations, and they're fabulous. We have a fabulous team, and they care a lot about what they're doing. I mean, I can preach a little about the culture, in that Pella is truly one that, we're driving caring and learning and results from our internal cultural manifestos, and it really manifests in the way that our products come to light too. But why should they choose Pella? I think, one, we have just a broad assortment. So, I would say that we have the best designed windows. I'm a little jaded in that perspective, but we just really have these immensely well-backed, well thought out, well-manufactured windows, but it's really across a broad base of material set. So you can do just about anything. We have all of the different ways and forms that you can access it. So, you can go into aisle at Lowe's and kick some tires. You can go visit one of our PDSNs and get a really deep dive with our field sales reps that often have very dynamic showrooms. You can be engaged with our Pella.com. So we have e-commerce that's nationalized now. So there's price transparency in the marketplace. And if you're R&R, if you're looking for a onesie twosie window and a sales rep won't call you back, we have a way for you to engage with Pella. So we really want to make sure that you have the opportunity to really create your vision, whether it's material based or aesthetically driven, or frankly, a purchase process because you're on a timeline. So there's a lot of different puts and takes behind that I think just access becomes a really cool thing, and education. So, you go to Pella.com, we're there to try and help you understand what those products are nowadays too. We spend a lot of time thinking about that consumer language and how to not be super technical in an area where you often still need to be really technical. So how do you get a consumer, but how do you also, our pros are super important. So how do we make sure that it's still valuable to them too, whatever we're really trying to market out there?
Yeah. If the higher ups are listening to this, when we publish this, I would just hope they hear what you and I both said about customer service, and whatever it takes to continue it, please do, because I just can't express how much of a breath of fresh air it is in this customer safe service, based climate that we're in. It's just very terrible. Pella is like a shining star, so just keep it up. Your background is marketing. So I want to pivot a little bit based on that. And we have a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners who listen to this podcast. What advice do you think you could give to small business owners in regards to marketing? Maybe something that they could do simple today that doesn't even cost much money, if any.
Engaging with the social is really such a dynamic way to do that. Pella's social engagement, we can have just a really interesting set that either comes from user-generated content to, we just finished last month a trends campaign where we focused on talking to people about ADUs, which is, not necessarily our wheelhouse, but it's also making sure that we explain kind of what's happening in the market. And if you're coming for, again, that inspiration or aspiration, that's really one of the areas that we spend our time trying to make sure we're creating the right content behind that. So filling the niche that making sure you dedicate time and space to the content that you want to engage the most people with, or maybe even, as you're traipsing into arenas and trying to establish yourself as a valid purveyor in that space, making sure that you're building up the content and resources or connections within that that allow you to kind of stretch in the ways and means of, you might not think of windows when you think about what's happening in your backyard, but as you're thinking about maximizing the use of your space, ADUs are a great way to do that without, scaling out your actual footprint of your land. And that's a perfect space for us to talk about windows and patio doors and maximizing light and how do you use those spaces. So that's one of the things that we've really tried to take for areas that you might not have considered Pella to be your number one knowledge source, and ways for us to have grown, is really just trying to make sure we get as many eyeballs onto engaging topics and try and get them back to our .com. So just making that connection, nothing new, I'm sure, for anybody, but really try and maximize the content for education where you can.
Yeah, but I think a reminder of fundamentals is always important for people. So I think that was great. Without naming names, what is the biggest mistake you've seen someone make in business in general since you've been a professional?
You know, good ideas that just can't quite make the lift, whether it be that they don't have the buy-in from, the larger base. So I'd say, sadly, entrepreneur is not in my wheelhouse. I've spent a lot of time in corporate, but I think about when you bring up really engaging ideas, and it could be very left field.
Mhm.
Not being able to really be biased towards action. You still have these great ideas and these great concepts, and it's really just never able to get quite the steam. When I think about small business owners and entrepreneurs, that's really the fundamental of where they get to go. So really making sure that you can bias towards action on even the furthest left field. So I know that sometimes I've pitched things internally. We pitch like an agency every once in a while,
Mhm.
and you pitch, you're like, let's do something wild. And I've got my backup, like, I'm pretty sure we'll get this guy here, but always making sure that you really shoot for the fences, because that you never know when you're really going to inspire the right set of ears to be totally bought in. And so bias towards action and really taking a swing for it is a big recommendation on my side.
Yeah, that's great. Action is everything. Otherwise, I mean, the ideas are just going to be ideas and they'll kind of float away at the end of the day. I think that's great. What is the smartest thing you've seen someone do with business since you've been a professional?
I am very verbose, and I am always impressed with concision. And so I think in the direct flip of the coin to where I've just said, oh, swinging for the fences, and I've watched great ideas die. I've watched great ideas die, but under the really thoughtful and concise decision making, which was, for example, in my old life, we had a really beautiful piece of furniture that we were just absolutely struggling with manufacturing, and how we would keep a thinness with holding to testing standards. The whole rules of puts and takes will ruin pretty stuff all the time. But the truth was, we really could not get it as dynamically designed as what we wanted to. And it would have been a first foray into a new category. And in the moment saying, hey, this is not the right thing to do. This is not the right foot forward, and willing to stop the project in that moment. A fairly well-developed situation at that point, solidly invested in both time and resources, and really having a concise moment to say there are learnings in this, to say that it is not the right thing to do, and to close the door on that and pivot away from it is also just really one of the, it's a fundamental that you don't often get to be challenged with in your career, to say, I'm being thoughtful and concise to what this means to my business in the moment. And it can be so hard to walk away from it. In product development, those are your babies. You don't want to leave your baby out there. And to walk into a room and have a really dynamic conversation and why it's not the right thing to do, even though your costs are totally sunk, it becomes one of the most hard but brilliant things to be a part of, when you can do it right and you can do it thoughtfully and you can really learn from it, and take it to the next level.
Yeah. One last question before we sign off, and I ask everybody this question. Knowing what you know now, and if you could go back in time when you first started your professional career, what is one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Advocate for yourself.
That was quick.
I'm very passionate about the people that I mentor, and I really love championing everybody that I have, that's in my personal circle, that I manage with, that I work and mentor with. And it's a humanist approach. It's good human behavior, and saying, like, what matters to me and how can I bring value to the business, and how does this business bring value to me, and being able to be clear about that. And in terms that I know often people young in their careers, maybe even old in their careers, will say, like, I just don't have a clear career path and it's hard for me and I don't want to write it down. And it comes down to, being able to showcase the experiences you want to have. And it becomes less about saying, I want this job, but it absolutely comes down to advocating for yourself and being clear about what you're interested in and what you're willing to give your time to. And I always advocate for that, to the people to advocate for themselves. But it really just comes down to trying to make sure that you're putting into the world, like, the most amount of enthusiasm on your topic as you can.
100%. Nicole, this has been fantastic. If people, for some reason, want to get in touch with you or learn more about Pella and its products, where should they go?
Well, Pella.com if you're interested in any of the Pella products, or e-commerce for those of you who are looking to check out what it might mean to buy a window online. If you want to reach out to me, I am available at willitsnk@Pella.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.